Hello again. This video tutorial shows you how to do the continuous join as you go stitch to join the squares to each other and also to the blanket. When you do your first strip of squares, you don't have any blanket to join it to, so you just join them to each other. This row we're going to join to where we've just finished a section of granny stripe on the blanket. The diagram in the pattern shows you the way that you do it. You can refer to that diagram. You start in the bottom right corner of the first square on the right hand side, and you work up one side along the top, joining to the blanket, down the other side, then you join the second square, work up along the blanket and down, and so on. Then when you get to the very end, you finish by coming along the bottom. So you don't complete a square in this first part of the join as you go. It's only at the end. It becomes much easier. It's more difficult to explain it than it is to actually do it. Now for this join as you go, I am using a half treble stitch, and I do that with all the joins in the blanket. I just think it makes not such a bulky joining stitch, and it keeps it neater. And the other thing to remember is that the join as you go stitch is always done on the front of the blanket, so always look for the stitch marker to show you that you're on the front of the blanket. So what I've done here is I've attached my yarn. I'm using a cream yarn, and by the way, these don't correspond to anything in the pattern. All I'm doing here, I've just done several rows of granny stripe because I just wanted to get some done, and I'm just using colours which I have left. Some of my colours I used up in the blanket, so this is not actually corresponding to what you've been told to do with your granny stripes as far as colours concerned. And also I'm using a cream just to be able to show it against the colours. So I've started with, I've attached my yarn and started with a chain 2 in the bottom corner and 1 half treble, and then I've come up every space with 2 half trebles until I got to the top right hand corner of the first square. And I've started to do my corner as normal by putting in 2 half trebles, and I've just chained 1 this time, and I've stopped, because now what we're going to do is we're going to look for that space between the chain 2 and the 1 treble stitch in the granny stripe, and I'm going to make a little slip stitch through that. And that's the very first part of this square being joined to the blanket. Then I come back to the square and I finish off that corner with 2 more half treble stitches. Then you go up and find the first space in the blanket and make a slip stitch. So we're going from side to side. On the square we're doing 2 half trebles in every space, and on the blanket we're doing 1 slip stitch into each space, and it's side to side, and that makes a nice neat join as you're working your join as you go. Obviously, or maybe it's not obvious, but if you were doing the first strip of squares and you didn't have a blanket to join them to, you wouldn't need to be slip stitching to anything. You would just make your top row the way you came up the side. Just work along with 2 half trebles in each. But that's just for the very first strip. So now I've got to the corner of the square. So I put in my 2 half trebles, treble 1, and then into the space, treble 1, chain 1, sorry, into the space. And then I'm going to come down this side of the square. So I've done half of that corner. I'm finishing it off with 2 half trebles. And I'm coming down, and when I get to the bottom of this side, I will then join my second square. And then you just work along like that until all 11 squares are joined in a row. So I'm going to do half of this corner and chain 1 and stop, and I'll just show you how we've attached that. See, that's attached to the blanket. This line of join as you go continues, so you've got it in the right place. You don't want to be out in the wrong place. So I got down to the bottom of this first square, the bottom left-hand corner, and I've put in 2 half trebles and I've chained 1. And now instead of doing anything like going along the bottom, forget about that, we're going to attach the second square now. So we make our first half treble into the second square because we're in the corner of the second square, and we've put in 2 half trebles. Then we need to go up the side of the first square to the first space and put in a slip stitch. Then up the side of the second square to the next space, 2 half trebles. And continue up that way like we did along the top, going from side to side and joining with a slip stitch to the first square and 2 half trebles in the second square. You can flip it around and turn it so that it's easier to work. I'm doing it this way for the camera. And by the time we get to the top of this section, we'll have joined the squares together. Nearly at the top now. Oops. So now I'm on to the corner of this second square. So I'm going to start it, and I'm going to put in my 2 half trebles, and then I'm going to find this corner of the first square and put in a slip stitch. And I'm also going to put a slip stitch into the same space in the blanket where the corner of the first square was anchored. That just holds it nice and firmly on the blanket. And then I'm going to go back and finish this top corner in the second square with 2 half trebles, and then I can find the next space in the blanket and continue along the top. And that is how we do the first part of the continuous join as you go. And the beauty of it is you've got one end to sew in from where you start, and we work all the way along and back to the beginning with the continuous, that's why it's called continuous, with this continuous stitch. So there are only 2 ends that you have to sew in when you get to the end. So there we have it. That's I've got this in the right position for you. That's the 3 sides of the first square, and I'm working the same thing with the second square. I'll come down, join a third one, and I think I'll just do that off camera, and then I'll show you what happens when you come back along the bottom. One thing to look for is that your join as you go is coming up on the front each time, so you've got that small ridge, and also they're in a straight line. That means you haven't gone out anywhere with your counting. So I'll come back when I've joined this plus a third square, and I'll show you what happens when we come back along the bottom. Right, I have added another square on with the continuous join as you go. You'll see that it's different from this one. I'm just using sample squares that I've made for the tutorials, so you wouldn't find this in the blanket itself. This is just a random square that I've added in, but it's the same size, so I've used the continuous join as you go. I've come along and I've joined the third square. I've come back up, joined it to the blanket along the top, and I'm coming down the side. Now let's just assume that we've done 11 squares, and this is now the very end square, the 11th square of the blanket, and you've got them all joined, and it's time to finish it off. So I'm going to turn this, just make sure I've got it where you can see it. And there's really nothing to worry about at this point. You just keep going with your half trebles. You get down to this corner, and this is one that you will do in its entirety. So it's 2 half trebles, chain 2, and 2 half trebles. You can turn everything round now. I'll just make sure that I'm still in camera. Yep. And now we're going to work along the bottom, and that means you're going to go right along all 11 squares to the very point where you started. So that is 2 half trebles. I'm going to work this little bit quite quickly because I want to show you what happens when you come to the point where the 2 squares are butting together. There's a little bit of an extra stitch to do just to make sure that you manage to travel over the join. So I'll work this as fast as I can. As soon as I say work as fast as I can, I start to make mistakes, but here we go. We've got to the point where I'm talking about. Right, now you'll see that on this point here, we've got 2 half trebles to put in to finish this corner, and 2 half trebles to put in to finish this corner. And there's quite a distance because of the join as you go to get from there to there. So there's a little trick in order to do that. And we'll put in the 2 half trebles first. And the next thing to do is to chain 1. And then find on your continuous join as you go, look for just the gap where you've joined one square to the other and there's a bit of a gap in the middle. Put your hook in there and make a slip stitch. And all that is doing is travelling your yarn along neatly without having a long jump. We can chain 1 again and then find the next corner and put in your 2 half trebles to finish it off. And that takes you neatly over that jump. Let's see if I move that. I'll do another one because I'm not convinced that was totally in camera for you. I'll just run along to this point. 2 half trebles each time. And I'll do this join again. So we've now got to the join once more, and I'm going to do my 2 half trebles in the first corner, and then I'm going to chain 1, and I'm going to slip stitch into that gap in the middle of the join as you go. So that's a slip stitch, and then a chain 1, and then 2 half trebles in the next corner to finish it off. And that is how it does look nice and neat and flat. So you would work along until you get to exactly the point where you started, and there's half of a corner worked in there. So when you come along to the very bottom, all you need to do is to put in 2 half trebles, chain 2, and then slip stitch to the top of the first chain 2, and that's you finished. And that is your continuous join as you go.